Hi guys, and welcome to another instalment of the Hero Rune Guide. In this episode we'll be taking a look at my latest obsession, Kobal the Pestilent. For a long time Kobal was regarded as one of the worst heroes in the game, and he actually was. But back in August he received a bit of an overhaul with the updates that you can see up on screen now. But he was still overlooked and no one actually really used him. However, we realised how good he was when Alrek put the KSD team together to help him speedrun Babel Mountain, and I made the video for it. Since then, the love for Kobal has kind of spread like wildfire. So this guide is going to be all about Kobal and the build that I use, but before we go into that, let's take a look at some of his abilities and his passives. So for Kobal's abilities, first off we've got Pandemic Swarm, which is a ranged dark attack on all enemies with a chance to disease. Not too bad, it's his second most powerful ability. His next one, Arcane Bolts. It's important to note that this is his weakest ability damage wise. It is useful against armoured targets and can go through shielded targets too. So anything like Zen, when he uses his basic attack, he will cast an Aegis shield upon himself. Well, this goes right through that. But it is his weakest attack. So it's important to note that one. Contagion Control, his third one, is his most powerful. It does a ton of damage and it lowers defense as well. So it gives the targets a defense debuff. And also does 2 times damage to those who are already diseased. That won't be particularly useful for the build that I'll be showing you guys, but it might be useful in other circumstances. For his passive abilities, we've got a bunch of cool stuff that's fairly useful here. So Plague Spreader, chance to disease on any crit, not too bad, fairly useful. Mystical 3, so extra damage versus tanks and slow targets, which make Kobal particularly deadly when you've got a high attack score. Dark Deception, I don't really see too much of a huge boon from this one, but you know, extra energy for all dark allies, it's all useful I suppose. This one though is what makes the build I'll go through shortly work. Without this it just doesn't work at all. So for every kill you get 1 energy back, which means that from room to room you're always at maximum more or less. Diseased Heart 3, so when he dies all of the enemies get diseased, so that's useful only in PvP really, not particularly useful in PvE. PvP is definitely where you see the benefit for that one. And then of course we've just got a Blessing of the Seeker naturally. So the build that I want to show you guys then is called King Kobal. I also have a similar build on my alt. He's level 44 at the moment and he's going to be called Kobal Jr. After the alt's name, Zombi Jr. So the purpose of the build is primarily for PvE. It is not really tuned for PvP, although it is useful because it is just powerful. It does so much damage that it's kind of useful for anything that you want to kill. But the main focus is for PvE. You have to remember that for PvP, Kobal is very squishy, and if you've got a fast hero on the defense, they're probably going to kill Kobal straight away. So you need to figure that in and plan accordingly. So first up, the target stats that we want for this build. My stats are here. As you can see, I've got a pretty whacking attack. Defense and skill are irrelevant really. Max health you're not really bothered about for this build either, but critical chance as well, you want that fairly high. So your targets though here are, you want your attack to be 3,800 if you want to be able to use Kobal effectively on Babel Mountain. You'd have seen the KSD video I did. And when I did that video, I had around 3,800 there. You could probably get away with some less, but aim for 3,800. To be able to replicate what you can get done on Babel Mountain, on Savage Grove and Permafrost Ice Cave boss islands, then I'd recommend a damage of around 4,200 or so. If you don't, then Kobal's not going to be killing things, he's not going to be one-shotting anyone, and the problem there is if you don't one-shot on each room, Kobal's not generating that energy, so it's all going to fall apart. Critical wise, you'll just want it as high as possible, as I mentioned, and his other stats basically they're irrelevant for this build. You don't have to worry about any of his other stats like defense and health and skill. His epic, whilst it's useful, it isn't mandatory for this build at all because the biggest boost coming from here is on his defense. Then he gets max health increase and then crit chance also. That's the useful bit, the crit chance really. And seeing as we're always going to be using a special ability on each room, then this effect of 30% chance to do 5 attacks is, again, it's kind of irrelevant. So you don't necessarily need to worry about your epic. So now on to the fun stuff. Let's take a look at the actual runes themselves. So as you can see, my Kobal is pretty heavily stacked with my best runes, really. For the purples, you want either power or battle, and you want 2 attack stats on each one of these. The third stat you want preferably is damage. You can stick a critical on there as well, just like on my second, but your preference there is damage. You don't want to be relying on the chance of a critical to actually clear your rooms. You just want to know that you're going to cause so much damage that you'll one-shot everyone in that room and move on to the next to get your full energy quota. Next, we have the red, so a similar sort of strategy there. We want 2 attack stats and preferably either a critical or a damage. Ideally, you want damage. And again, same story for the green too. 2 attack stats and preferably damage, critical second, skill definitely a third. And then for the last one, what you want to do is have a precision and put one with an attack stat on there. Now, I was quite lucky in rolling this one, and I got a huge attack stat there for 233, which all adds up to that attack bonus. What you don't want to be doing is putting any defense on there, but I'll talk more about that shortly. So this is Kobal Jr. On my level 44 account. This is what I've used to complete a lot of challenge mode. So I've not been able to be as tailored with my runes. I've kind of had to just give Kobal what I've managed to find and what I've managed to actually rustle up whilst crafting. So it's a similar sort of strategy though. You want to just pile on the attack. You need to accept that Kobal is very squishy, pile on the attack and hope you get lots of one-shots in. To help Kobal along though, what I tend to do for this account is have someone before him that will increase his damage and his attack. So I will often precede Kobal's attacks with Bramble casting Dance Party, or maybe I'll have Echo with Electric Skin. Then you get extra crit on there and extra damage in the case of Bramble, and you know, you can go through clearing those rooms. And what this has allowed me to do is progress quite far through challenge mode, and also be able to defeat those bosses that would otherwise be quite impossible to do. A quick look at his stats as well. So again, I think that's fairly high for a level 44 based on those runes that you've just seen. But what you do need to do is make sure on this lower account that you fully ascend him as quickly as possible. So get your ascensions in ASAP. He was my top priority on this account. I made sure that I got the runes for him as quickly as I possibly could. Whilst we watched some footage of Kobal in the background, I thought I'd go over some of the general principles of this build. Some of the stuff may well have been repeated earlier, but I feel it's important to cover it anyway again so that you guys have it all in one place. So firstly, stack up the attack. You need to be able to one-shot rooms so that it gains the energy ready for the next room. If you don't do that, then the whole build is going to fall apart. Critical is useful, but raw attack is way more important for this build. You need to really stack that damage up, as I say. Don't use destruction runes. Even the best ones out there, they are completely way weaker in comparison to attack runes. If in doubt, go and take a look on the forums at some of Fuzul's posts, some of the analysis that is done. It is very interesting information. Don't use any defensive runes. It's a complete waste on this build. He'll never be able to take too many hits, so by using defensive runes or health runes, you are actually undermining what you're trying to achieve with this build. Remember that his middle ability is the weakest, so unless you're up over 4,500 attack or thereabouts, then cycle his first and third ability. The problem with using his middle one is that sometimes it might not kill everyone on the room and you won't maximise on all of the energy that you could have got. As I've said before, his third attack does the most damage and applies a defense debuff onto those you've just attacked. So make sure you save in this ability for the end bosses on Boss Island. The only exception there is the Permafrost Ice Cave bosses at the end. Don't use the third ability on them, use the first one because the little Echo guy, he's immune to spirit attacks. You've been warned. Kobal's epic weapon isn't vital for this build at all, and it's generally not particularly useful other than to give that extra 10% crit when you're up at maximum level. He does increase some defense as you saw earlier, but you know, again, it's not that significant for this build, so it's not a focus. It certainly is not vital. And then as for team synergies, as you've seen in previous videos that I've done, bring along Dagrun to get an extra 15% damage, which applies to all casters. Bring along Pigneus to get extra damage to criticals. Not sure what the extra damage is there. In the actual text itself, it just says it's been increased or you get a buff. And then also, if you are finding that you need some defense for Kobal, which for this build, again, the enemy shouldn't be getting attacks on you, then you can bring along Astrid, who gives a 50% defense for all casters and healers. So that wraps things up for us here then, guys, for this episode. You will see more coming from Starskream and me in the coming weeks, so keep your eyes out for that. Let us know who you want to see next and we'll see what we can do. Leave comments below or post us a message in our sticky thread on the rune discussion and strategy section in the Dungeon Boss forums. If you like this video, then make sure you subscribe, like and share, and I'll see you next time.